Hi, good day everyone. I am Chirag Mehta, General Manager of MSM.
And I'm Sunita Qureshi, Vice President of MSM Global. Welcome to today's MSM webinar live session, where we will discuss the status of study permits for Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you are doing well, coping well, and staying safe and healthy with your loved ones. Our agents are very valuable to us, and we want them to be constantly updated with what's happening in the education sector, especially during this unprecedented time. MSM is honored to have with us a special guest, Ms. Elena Balboa, First Secretary for Migration at the High Commission of Canada in India, and Ms. Anandita Bura-Hugain at the High Commission of the Outreach Officer at the High Commission of Canada in India, who will share more details and will address your questions related to today's agenda points. Today's session will include updates from the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, details on the approval in principle and post-graduation work permit. After the discussion, we will accept questions from you.
At MSM, we recognize that the situation can take its toll on the education agents who work so hard to support these students' study abroad plans. We are with you every step of the way. This is why we have never stopped working since day one of the pandemic. As lockdowns were put in place, we thought it would be best to bring the events to you through MSM Live, or a series of agent e-summits and webinars that connects agents to our partner schools around the world. MSM Live has reached out over 15,000 attendees from 60 countries. For today's session, please note the following points. This is a webinar, and by default, webcams and mic are inactive for all the participants. Please drop in all your questions in a Q&A section by tapping on the Q&A icon on your control panel. These questions will be answered during the webinar by our support team, and most important questions will be answered live by the facilitators at the end of the webinar during the Q&A section. Please drop in all technical issues related queries here in the chat box, and we'll be happy to support you.
MSM operates round the clock, covering all the time zones to get things done faster and more efficiently. We attribute this on-ground presence with remote teams that build up partner brands overseas, generate leads, and provide back office support. We are privileged to have two ladies, both respected in the field of migration and communication. Our first speaker worked as Operations Supervisor for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. She is now the First Secretary for Migration at the High Commission of Canada in India. Let us welcome Ms. Elena Balboa. Our second guest speaker is a dynamic and committed professional with a decade of experience in the communications field. She has worked across various communication fields, from media management, video production, to social media management. Everyone, let's welcome Ms. Anandita Bura-Hugain, the Outreach Officer at the High Commission of Canada in India.
Thank you so much, Sunita, for the very beautiful introduction, and thank you, Chirag, for welcoming us all into the webinar. Good afternoon, all the participants. Thank you for tuning into this webinar, and also thank you to MSM team for putting it together. We do understand that these are unprecedented times, so we are very happy to come on board and provide all the updated information to you, which will in return be helpful for your prospective students. So without any further ado, let's start with the information that we want to share today. So as Sunita mentioned, my name is Anandita, and I'm the Outreach Officer for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and I'm based out of the New Delhi office. Before we start the webinar and I start sharing information, something which I would like to mention, that as you all know, we are in a very volatile and a very dynamic situation right now, and things are rapidly evolving. So the information that will be shared today is valid as of today only. As you know, things are changing and we get new updates and information all the time, not only from the Government of Canada, but also here with the universities and the institutes. So please make a note of this. And for all the latest information and most updated and current information on our process changes and policy changes and travel restrictions, you can always visit our website at canada.ca/immigration, or you can also follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter at Canada in India. Well, I'll be sharing the coordinates for those at the end of my presentation today. So let's start. And I know that, I mean, this is not news for you because you are all involved in this, and you all know that international students make a significant contribution, both culturally and socially, to Canada. They generate more than $21 billion in economic activity. And since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we at IRCC have implemented a number of temporary policy changes to support and reassure international students and also all the institutes, post-secondary and otherwise. Actually, ironically, the fall 2020 semester has by far the largest international student intake throughout the academic year. And this, as we all know, is fast approaching. The most recently implemented measures were introduced on July 14th and are aimed at this upcoming cohort of students whose classes are going to start from the fall of 2020. The changes will continue Canada's reputation as a premier destination for international students, and they will demonstrate the importance of the International Student Program and also the contributions international students make to Canada. Thereby, we encourage students to still consider studying in Canada, even though their classes for the first 3 months of the semester, which will be from September to December, will be online. But we would still want all the to encourage all the students and also encourage all the participants to communicate this to the prospective students. Next slide, please. So as you can see, our agenda today will cover the following topics. We will be talking about the travel restrictions to Canada, exemptions on those travel restrictions. We will be discussing the recent changes to the study permit processing. We will be touching upon fraud tips and also what you know before you travel to Canada. We will then round up the presentation with a Q&A session where we will be taking up the questions that I'm sure you are now dropping in the Q&A window of this chat box. So without any further ado, let us get into all the information bit. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So to protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID-19, the Government of Canada implemented travel restrictions that limit travel to Canada. And until further notice, most foreign nationals cannot travel to Canada, even if they have a valid visitor visa or an electronic travel authorization. As you can see, this is something which is already mentioned on your on the slide that you can see. So something that you need to note is that these restrictions stop non-essential or non-discretionary travel to Canada. Now, what does that mean? Gradually, as we move on through the presentation, this will be explained to you in a little more detail. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So, who can enter Canada? In light of the travel restrictions which have been imposed, the list that you see reflects who is people who are currently able to travel to Canada. So for example, you can see that a Canadian citizen or a Canadian permanent resident can travel to Canada, someone who is registered under under Canada's Indian Act, a protected person, a foreign national coming for an essential non-discretionary purpose from the United States, and a foreign national coming for an essential purpose from a country other than the United States and are exempt from the travel restrictions. So you will see that this is not the first 2 points, but maybe the last 2 points are not very clear on whether it is valid for or applicable for Indian students or Nepalese students or not. You can, of course, find out in much more detail, like I said, from our website. But during the course of this presentation, we will be trying to make this a little more clear to you. So can we move on to the next slide? So let's talk about some of these travel restriction exemptions. Like we said, travel restrictions have been imposed, but then there are also exemptions which have been placed, which means that there is still a group of people who are able to travel to Canada. And let's talk about who they might be. So basically, all temporary residents need to demonstrate that they are traveling to Canada for an essential purpose. Now, when we talk about temporary residents, even students or for temporary foreign workers who were otherwise working in Canada and had for some purpose come to India just before the outbreak of the pandemic, are also a part of this group. And what do we mean by essential travel? So essential travel refers to reasons for traveling that are non-discretionary and not optional. So a very simple example is traveling for tourism. This is definitely considered non-discretionary and non-essential right now. But then, of course, the question comes, what about students? So emergency orders made under the Quarantine Act do not permit people to travel to Canada for optional or discretionary purposes, like I mentioned, tourism, recreation, or entertainment. However, there are certain exemptions to this, and these exemptions are some workers, some students, some approved PRs, and potentially some visitors looking to reunite with immediate family members already in Canada. So note that visitors will need to have an authorization letter to travel to Canada if the family in Canada is not a Canadian or a PR. Students and workers will not require such a letter. So when we say some international students are exempt from these travel restrictions, we ideally mean those group of students who were already studying in Canada and who were already in the middle of their session. They had probably come back to their home country for holidays or for whatever reason for a short duration of time, and they got stuck in their home country because of the ban on international travel, and they couldn't travel back to Canada. Uh, so those are the students who are or might still be exempt. Then there is the other group of students who are the fresh students, like for example the ones whose classes are going to start in the fall of 2020. They are the students who've never landed in Canada and they're going for the first time as a student to Canada. So those are students who are definitely not exactly part of these exemptions. But when talking about these exemptions, one very important thing to keep in mind is that the purpose for these students, whether they were already staying in Canada or they're going for the first time to Canada, is that whether it is essential or non-essential. Because as you all will probably know, a lot of the institutions in Canada have already declared that they will have their classes online till December 31st, 2020. In such a situation, the purpose for the student to travel to Canada and to be physically present in Canada to take classes kind of becomes non-essential. So that is why a student has to be very careful when they are considering whether they can or should travel to Canada right now, because they might be considered a non-essential travel because they are not having any physical classes. We will discuss, of course, a little more in detail, and I'm sure this will become a little more clear as we proceed through the presentation. So can we just move on to the next slide? Thank you. So talking about the travel restriction exemptions for students in a little more detail, like I mentioned, not all students will be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. So to be exempt, you must be in possession of either a study permit visa issued on or before March 18th, or a port of entry letter of introduction, which indicates your study permit was approved on or before March 18, 2020. However, equally, it is also important that you must also be able to demonstrate that it is essential for you to travel to Canada. So like I mentioned, if you have in-person classes or you are already in the middle of your program of study and need to return to Canada, then you can demonstrate this by providing a recently dated letter from your institute or from the Students' Institute that explains why they physically need to be in Canada for the fall semester. These documents must be provided to the airline with whoever they are traveling to Canada at the time they board the flight, and the Canadian Border Security Agency once they reach their port of entry in Canada. A failure to do so may result in them being denied boarding for their flight or being forced to return from Canada at their own expense. So as mentioned in the previous slide, we will not provide any travel authorization letter for students. All you need to travel is your visa or your port of entry introduction letter, and evidence that your travel to Canada is essential. Now, this point is very important to note. The students should not travel to Canada until at most 3 weeks before the start date of their class, for which their physical presence in Canada is required. So what does this mean? It means that if an institution now today declares that or comes out with a statement saying that they will start physical classes for their students from January 21st, 2021, students should not travel to Canada by end of December or in the middle of December. They should only travel to Canada from starting from the first week of January, because that is 3 weeks prior to the start of their physical class date. So this is something which needs to be remembered as well. For those students who have already been issued visas for a previous semester but were not able to travel to Canada to attend, they need to send the copy of their new letter of acceptance and advise us, IRCC, of their new start date. So those documents can also be sent via web form. So your new letter of acceptance needs to mention your new physical class start date, because it might already be a case that you're already taking online classes while you are in India or Nepal already. So can we move to the next slide now? Let's look at what our recent processing changes have been, and this have been very recently introduced. So I'm sure quite a lot of you are already aware of this, but nevertheless, we will still go through this. So what it says is, visa application centers, as you know, are also closed currently, especially in India. This means that we are not able to accept any paper applications for any kind of visas. As such, only online submissions are being accepted. So if you go on our IRCC website, we normally publish processing times for each of our countries or missions, and where we state the expected processing time for different types of visas. If you have been there recently, you will know that these are no longer accurate. Why these are no longer accurate and why there are processing delays is because of reduced staff at the mission. So pretty much all our offices across different countries, and more so in India, are working with very reduced and limited staff. That is the reason a lot of processing delays are happening. That being said, we are working very hard to process all the visa applications in time for students whose classes start in the fall of 2020, so that their studies do not get affected. But in order to do this, we need your help, and we need you to communicate to your students that they need to submit their application as early as possible, definitely online, and submit all the requirements that they have and that they should submit as soon as possible. So we are of course aware that there are many service disruptions which are there currently. I'm, I'm sorry. We know that the VACs are all closed. We know that panel physicians, where students have to go to submit their medical tests and get their reports collected, are also operating with a very limited capacity. In some cities, they might not be operating at all. We also understand that a lot of schools, in fact, schools in India are still not open, and because of which exam results or exams themselves have been pending. So we understand that the result for the students might still be pending. We also understand that there are limitations on the IELTS examination or the English language test that students need to take, because physical test centers as of now across the country are still not operating in all the cities. So we understand that all these limitations are in place. But having said all of that, we will not refuse any application for non-compliance or failure to submit these kind of documents. This means that you do not have to worry about the deadline specified in the request letter. So if you apply online, you will receive a biometric submission request letter, which will ideally state a deadline by which you should submit your biometrics. Now, if you see that that date is too close, or that date is already passed, or maybe you can, anticipate that the visa application center near your place or in your country will not open by that date, then that is fine, because that is something which we are also aware of, and we have made note of that. But one thing that you need to note is that we will not be able to complete processing the application until all the required and requested documents have been received. So you need to submit as many of those documents as you. However, we have provided some exceptions to these following to to the collection of these documents. And what are these documentations which are exempt? So like I said, the English language test result, your medical test report form, and also your biometrics. When we say we have given an exemption, it doesn't mean that we will not be requiring them at any stage. It only means that right now, because of all the service disruptions, you do not need to submit them when you are submitting your online application form. But things which you definitely have to submit now when you're submitting your online application form is of course, your application forms itself, the fees, and basically your fee receipt and your letter of acceptance from your university or institute in Canada. You have to note that we cannot physically issue any visas right now till the visa application centers across the country open, because we have no mechanism in place right now to transmit passports, whether to collect passports from you or even to disburse passports to you. However, we are trying our level best to return the passports which were already submitted to us before the lockdown happened in the country and our offices and also VACs were shut down. So we are trying to not only process those applications at the earliest, but we are also trying to return those passports to the concerned people. Any documents which are mailed to the mission at this point of time will be returned to the sender itself. So please do not attempt to send your passports directly to us, and kindly wait for the visa application centers to open. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so these are the stages, or this is what is happening in terms of application approvals for applications which have been received or which were pending approval post March 18. So the recently introduced measures state that complete study permit applications will be prioritized. This means that the application contains the forms, the fees, medicals, biometrics, the letter of acceptance, and all required supporting documents. It also states that if your program of study will qualify you for a postgraduate work permit, also known more commonly as a PGWP, and part of your course will come under fall 2020 semester, it has been moved to an online format because of the pandemic. The time that you spent on the online portion, even if you are outside of Canada, will still be counted towards your PGWP. However, the flyer to this is that the online portion must be 50% or less of your entire program of study. What this means is that you will still need to complete at minimum half of your program in Canada physically for all of that time to count towards your PGWP. As per the new study permit processing changes, a two-stage approval process has been put in place. So we hope that this will provide some breathing room and some relief to the students who are kind of in a very difficult situation and stressful situation right now, because they know that they're not able to submit full applications because of a non-availability of medicals, biometrics, or even English language tests. So what is this two-stage approval process? The first stage in this process is the approval in principle, also known as AIP. So what this means? This is essentially the eligibility assessment of the student's application. If we receive, or if the student receives an AIP approval, it means that your online course time will count towards the time for your PGWP. This means you do not have to wait for your physical visa to be issued before you can start your online classes. And the second stage of this new two-stage approval or processing process states or refers to the admissibility and final decisions on your application. In cases of approval, this results in visa issuance. So what would entail in the second stage? So the second stage would actually look at all the information which you could not provide because of service disruptions. So it will look at definitely your medicals, your biometrics, and also in some cases, if you've still not been able to appear for your English language test, then also those test results. Please, however, note that an AIP approval is not a guarantee of a visa. Only the stage 2, which is the final approval stage, which includes the admissibility decisions, will mean that you will be issued a visa. So for example, you may be refused a visa despite having an AIP because you have failed your medical exam. So you have to always keep that in mind. Just getting approved in the first stage, which is the AIP stage, doesn't mean that you have been approved for a study permit visa. Let's move on to the next slide. So, explaining the approval in principle a little more in detail. The AIP applies to applications who have not yet received a final decision as of March 18. So, anyone who has received their final decision on or before March 18 are visas, which means they have already been approved. It refers to the eligibility assessment of your application. So essentially it means that even though you are still missing documents like your medicals or biometrics, you may still be able to receive an approval in principle on your visa application. The criteria for this assessment has not changed. Neither the requirements of how an officer makes that assessment has changed. So you have to keep in mind that you are still showing proof that you are a genuine student. It means that you have demonstrated the academic and language capability through the submission of your IELTS tests. You have been accepted by a DLI in Canada. This means that you have submitted a valid letter of acceptance. You have shown proof that you have sufficient funds to not only pay for your studies, but also sustain yourself and your living expenses and transportation without working during the course of your study in Canada. What this means is that you need to submit financial evidence of liquid funds to pay for all these things for the first year of school. And how do you show proof of that? You obviously show documentation which will actually convince the officer who is assessing your application that you have sufficient funds to sustain yourself. And of course, very importantly, you will have to assure the officer that you will leave Canada by the end of your authorized stay. This means that the student has demonstrated through evidence or explanation that their ties to their home country will motivate them to leave Canada once their visa expires. Now, what happens once you receive an application approved in principle? Once you receive an AIP on your application, a letter will be sent to you meaning the student here, electronically to relay this information. The student may also receive requests for biometrics and medicals if they have not submitted them yet. And then again, even if they do receive the request from our end, if there are still service disruptions, VACs are still closed, panel physicians are still not operating, then deadlines on those will automatically get extended. Moving on to the next slide. So, what are the documents that are required in order to submit your application for the first stage of processing, which is the approval in principle? So I'll be talking about the student direct stream first. This, of course, doesn't apply to Nepalese students, but this applies to Indian students. So if you look at the requirements which have been mentioned on your screen, you can see that they are pretty much the same, and they will remain the same because there are no changes, like I mentioned, in the requirements or the eligibility criteria to qualify for the student direct stream. Student will still need to submit an unconditional letter of acceptance. We will still need to see IELTS test results demonstrating a 6 band or higher. Tuition fee for the first year need to be paid. A GIC for 10,000 Canadian dollars needs to be shown. You need to attach your secondary or post-secondary transcripts. And of course, if it is a Quebec-bound student, then we also need to see the CAQ for Quebec. Now, if you see, the only thing missing as per the requirements of SDS over here is a medical result or a medical record. The reason that it is being exempted in the AIP stage or in the first stage of processing is, like I've mentioned, because your panel physician is not operating right now, and that is why you're not able to submit your medicals. However, having said that, you will have to submit it for the second stage of processing. So it doesn't mean that it has been completely waived off. Now, looking at the non-student direct stream or the general category for study permit applications, this is applicable for both Indian students as well as Nepalese students. So you can all see the list of documents which have been stated over here. And we also always recommend that students try and submit, even if it is just a one-page cover letter, to just include why they have chosen the program of study that they are going to do in Canada, and what are their financial plans to pay for that particular course, and how they hope to benefit from that particular course. So these are the documents, and if you see them clearly, you will of course understand that these are pretty much the same. Nothing has changed. Moving on to the next slide. Admissibility assessments. So what do we mean by admissibility assessments? These are the assessments which are made after the first stage of study permit processing. So after you have, or after the student receives an AIP or approval in principle, this is what will be looked at the second stage of processing and just before visa issuance. So these include things like criminality, medicals, and biometric, amongst other things. Of course, the student has to complete the immigration medical exam. And one very important thing, they need to answer all questions very truthfully and completely. You should not, you should communicate to the students that no information regarding any prior visa applications made, whether for Canada or any other country, need to be withheld. So for example, if they were ever refused a visa, whether for Canada, for any other country, they need to mention it. It will not impact their application in any way, but the information is very important for us. So truthful information and complete submission of all the information as per the application form is very important. And of course, one very important thing is that students submit authentic and genuine documents. Moving on to the next slide. Again, due to VAC closures and service disruptions, the applicants may not be able to submit certain things, but a few things which I've already stated are the requirements of SDS. They still remain, and that those are required or will be required for the first stage of application processing. So if stuff which has been mentioned under the SDS requirement, if documents are not submitted that way, or those required documents are not submitted, then the application will automatically move from the SDS or student direct stream processing to the non-SDS stream. So it doesn't mean that the application gets cancelled immediately because it was sent for SDS and we don't find all the SDS documents there. It will be moved to the non-SDS stream. So please make sure that if your students are applying or wish to apply to be eligible under the SDS stream, then they need to submit those mandatory required documents. Moving on. So this is something which of course is very attractive for students who are coming to Canada to study and continues to be so. Students who are studying in Canadian institutions, colleges or universities are eligible to work, as we all know that. Now, essentially, if a student switched to part-time studies or had to take a break in studies, for example, the spring semester may have been cancelled due to COVID-19, then they may still continue to work on and off campus, provided that they were previously a full-time student and are already authorized to work on or off campus pre-pandemic. For the off-campus work, the maximum limit still remains 20 hours per week during the academic session and full-time during regular academic breaks. Now, for those students who are in essential services or doing jobs in essential sectors, which include, for example, the health sector, they can work for more than 20 hours, and this stipulation is in place till August 31st, 2020. To qualify for this, they need a valid study permit. They need to be currently in an academic session. They need to be authorized to work on or off campus, and they definitely must be working in an essential job. For the students who are not yet in Canada, a common question that often comes to us is, if you do go to Canada and work those maximum 20 hours per week while taking online classes for the fall semester, would they be able to do that? And the very quick and short answer to that is no. So I would like to remind everyone over here that what we have discussed in earlier slides regarding what students need to demonstrate in order to travel to Canada regarding essential and non-essential travel is what is to be considered here. Unless the physical presence of the student is required for studies, it is not essential for them to travel to Canada. Moving on to the next slide. So what about authorized leave during studies and especially during the COVID-19 scenario? There are a number of reasons why the designated learning institutes or a particular college or university may authorize leave during studies, such as strikes, family emergencies, or even medical reasons. To still be considered actively pursuing studies, the authorized leave of the student must not exceed more than 150 days from the first day of leave. Failure to do so means that they have not complied with the conditions of their study permit, and that may result in them being sent back from Canada. If for whatever reason they require a leave which is longer than 150 days, they should change their status from student to visitor, and forms and instructions on how to do that is all available on our website. A very important thing to note over here is that a student cannot study elsewhere or work anywhere else during their authorized leave period. In case of a DLI or an institute may have to close permanently because of this whole COVID-19 pandemic scenario, then the student should either enroll in a new program of study with another DLI or change their status from student to visitor, or they should leave Canada. For the purposes of assessing if a student is enrolled and actively pursuing their studies, any time taken to transition to a new DLI and program, change status, or even leaving Canada should not exceed 150 days from the date the school is closed. So as you can see, that is very clearly mentioned on the slide that you can see in front of you. Moving on. Online courses and how that impacts the postgraduate graduation work permit for students. There is a significant difference between distance learning and online courses. So what the students will have to do now from fall 2020 is what we will be considering as online courses, until of course a student had explicitly already enrolled for a course which is a distance learning course. Distance learning courses are always only offered remotely online and even under normal circumstances. So only because if it is COVID-19, a distance learning course will now get changed into an online course. That will not be the scenario. If it was distance learning right from the beginning, it will continue to be so even during COVID-19 and even after, when things become a little more normalized. The online courses that we are referring to over here refer to the fall 2020 semester, which would otherwise have been offered in person, but because of this whole situation, have now moved to an online format, and that too, as of now, only till December 31st, 2020. And hence the DLIs, of course, are planning to return to physical classes once the situation gets better. So for those students who are taking online courses for a program of study which would normally qualify them for a postgraduate work permit, they can have that time counted towards the postgraduate work permit or PGWP, even if they have not yet started studying in Canada. So for example, if you have students who had started their course in the spring term and they've already started them online, and this was a course which was initially intended to be physical, it means that their course or the time that they have started with the online courses has now already been started to count towards their PGWP. And for the fall 2020 semester, it is expected that students take on a full online course load in order for that time to be counted towards their PGWP. So if they reduce their credits because they say that, no, we're studying online, I want to do this, the bigger chunk of it when I'm physically there, then it will not be considered towards the PGWP. They will have to choose the same amount of credits they would have chosen if they were physically present in Canada to do their classes. Next slide, please. Now that I have shared a considerable amount of information regarding the new changes, the travel restrictions, let us talk about something which we talk about, whether it is a COVID-19 scenario or not, is fraud awareness. Something that students need to constantly be aware is that they are not using fraudulent or unauthorized representatives. When we talk about authorized representatives, if you can see the ICCRC or Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council, We have a barcode here. If you can scan it, it will take you to their website. So authorized representatives are actually registered on there. And for help with visa application related information and submission, students should only take help from these authorized representatives. In addition to that, students need to protect themselves and not fall into traps of, where they're being asked to pay a lot of money for a fraudulent document, a fraudulent visa, or even a fraudulent transcript in certain cases. They need to make sure that they know how to differentiate between fraudulent websites and emails that say that they are coming directly from IRCC, but are actually coming from, a fraudulent source. There are also people who call them up to say that we're calling from IRCC, your application has been processed, you need to submit this much money in order to get your visa. So students need to be aware of all of these. So kindly communicate that students can go on our website to know how to protect themselves from fraud, and also how to identify what is fraudulent and what is genuine. Moving on to the next slide. So once students have their visas, and then we have students who will start traveling, and even if for those students who are exempt currently and are able to travel right now, there are certain conditions which they need to consider before they consider getting into a flight or getting into air travel. So the airline that they're traveling with will require them to submit the following documents. Of course, they have to show their passport. They will have to show that they have a valid study permit issued on or before March 18, and they have to show documents to demonstrate that their travel to Canada is essential. So again, reiterating the point, failure to provide any of these documents will mean that they will most likely be denied boarding. In addition to this, they will also be required to pass a health check, which will be performed by the airline officials just before they board their flight. And if they show any COVID-19 symptoms, they will be denied, or most likely be denied boarding. If they are approved for boarding, then they must wear a non-medical mask or face covering upon arrival in Canada. So this is something which every student who is traveling to Canada from now on needs to make sure that they follow. Moving on to the next slide. What happens once you arrive in Canada? So all the travelers must undergo a health checkup upon arriving in Canada. It is also mandatory for all passengers as of now who are arriving in Canada that they must self-quarantine for 14 days. What does this mean? It means that the student, whoever is traveling, they have a plan to self-quarantine themselves for 14 days. And they must confirm and provide evidence that they have a suitable place to quarantine, which means that they need to provide an address explaining how they intend to self-quarantine if other people are also living at the same location. And they have to explain how they intend to respect the quarantine plan, meaning how they intend to receive essential items such as food, etc. So basically, in a gist, what this means is that before arriving in Canada, the students need to be absolutely clear and sure where they're going to go straight from the airport, how they have to stay there for 14 days. And if it is a place where they're also staying with other people, how are they going to protect those other people, and how will they have access to essential items? So they have to have that plan in place before they arrive in Canada. It is advised that students do not travel to Canada unless they have a viable quarantine plan, because failure to comply to these may have consequences like a fine of 750,000 Canadian dollars or 6 months in prison, or they might be deemed inadmissible, removed from Canada, and banned from entering the country for a year. So just having the visa and boarding the flight, or the airline allowing the student to board, is not enough. The student has to have their next plan in place the moment they book their tickets to Canada, or even before that. This is also equally important, as is the rest of the information that has just been shared. Moving on to the next slide, which means that we are pretty much at the end of our presentation now. Like I mentioned at the beginning, These are the links for our websites. We have the Canada.ca immigration one, and then we also have an India specific page. If you scan this barcode, which you see on your screen with your smartphones, whether it is an Android or an iPhone, you will be able to download a document which is actually a step-by-step guide on how students can apply for their study permits online. And again, reiterating the fact that pretty much all the information shared is valid today, but they might change overnight. So you need to be up to date with all our information, and that's why you need to follow us on our website and also on social media. Our social media handles are also given there on your screen. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. I know it might have been a lot of information for you to take, but I hope you have been able to take in the important bits. And I think we will now open the house for questions and answers. And to answer your questions, we have Elena Balboa, our officer, our first secretary for the student unit manager, who will be responding to your questions. So thank you so much. Elena, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Balboa, First Secretary of Migration here at the High Commission of Canada. Thank you for joining us. I believe that MSM will be facilitating this portion, and I'm happy to answer as many questions that have come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. And as we've got a lot of questions, and I hope we will be able to answer as many as we can. The first one comes in: if students have taken a Duolingo test and applied for visa with an unconditional offer from a university or college under non-STS, will they all be compulsorily asked to take an IELTS in-person test score?
Sorry, Sunita, can you repeat the last part of that question? You just cut off there for a moment.
Oh, okay. So it says, if students have taken a Duolingo test and applied for a visa with an unconditional offer from a university or college under non-STS, will they all be compulsory asked to take an IELTS in-person test score?
Yes, so IRCC is not accepting any Duolingo test scores, which means that all applicants who wish to obtain a study permit to Canada must take some sort of in-person English language test. So our preference would be IELTS or TOEFL. If you could take the in-person test as soon as you are able and submit that with your application, whether it's upfront with your application or afterwards, after you've submitted your application, that would be ideal. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have, will the IRCC accept IELTS, TOEFL, and PTE in-person test scores to access English language in the eligibility criteria?
Yes, so our preference is IELTS and TOEFL only because we are able to verify those test scores through their online verification portal. With PTE, the student must provide us access to their test scores. If you do not provide us this access, your application may be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. What is the processing time for expecting an AIP as of now?
So as Anindita mentioned, current processing times for whether it's the SDS stream or non-SDS stream are sort of moot. We don't have any processing time frames available for you right now, but what I can say is that IRCC is working very hard, whether it's the office here in Delhi or our sister offices in Canada, to process as many applications as we can to, at the very least, the AIP stage in time for the fall 2020 semester. Thank you.
Okay, and okay, so now, okay, thank you. So we have another question here. Given the positive cases in India are peaking now, and it's going to be very impossible for the Indian government to allow IELTS to fail, in-person testing to be done. So given this fact that most of the students will not have IELTS scores as of now, and they're there's not much of a scope for thousands of students across the state of Punjab to get their IELTS scores to file visas before September 15th. So the case here is, that would the visa, with the processing time, change to accommodate more students?
So thank you for this question. It's a very good one. Right now, our current policy is to request for the in-person test scores. And a lot of that is because of the high risk for fraud in this region. As we process visa applications here, we note a number of applications where, for example, imposters are used to take their tests. This is why we really want, we don't want to rely on English language tests that have been taken online, because there's a higher potential for fraud. With the in-person tests, we feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of the risk for fraud. Now, I understand that yes, India is still, the situation, the COVID situation is worsening, and there are operational limitations to IELTS centers reopening to be able to accommodate all of the students to do those tests and get those to us in time. But as of right now, there is no such policy to waive these tests or accept online tests. But if that changes, we will certainly publish this information and let all of you know. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, what about the students whose study permit application got approved after 18th March and having a blended program for which student has a support letter from the college?
Okay, so this is also a very good question, because the current travel restrictions, they have a deadline. So they actually end tomorrow night, July 31st. And one of three things could happen. It could either be extended, meaning the same restrictions will continue to apply, or they could be amended where certain parts of that order will be changed to potentially accommodate more people or restrict more people from coming in, or all of the travel restrictions could be scrapped completely. So one of these three things could happen. As of right now, we do not have the information to share with you what those might be. We'll just have to wait until after July 31st. Now, as for your question, you asked, what about students who have potentially partly in-person classes for fall 2020, but you didn't receive your visa before March 18. So currently, I can only speak to the current travel restrictions that are in place, which is that you are not able to travel if your visa was issued to you after March 18. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one says, what if the student is having a one-year course and starting in September 20 intake, and if the travel restrictions did not clear, then the student would need to complete the entire one-year course from India. Can he get a next year course from India, and is he eligible for a 3 years work permit?
So the way the policy is currently written is that it's by program, that you complete 50% of a program outside of Canada and 50% in Canada. And a minimum of 50% must be completed in Canada. So if, for example, yes, travel restrictions, there is a possibility that they could be extended up until 2021. This all depends on what the situation on the ground is with respect to COVID-19. All I can say is this is up to you to decide whether or not you want to continue with your program for January 2021, whether, self-improvement and learning something new is enough for you, or if you need something more, meaning do you need all of that time to count towards your postgraduate work permit? So some students have indicated that they might pause their studies and wait until the travel exemptions lift so that they can actually do the latter half of the course in Canada. And some students have indicated that, no, it's fine. Let me just finish the course and let me take another one that I can do from Canada once the travel restrictions are lifted. So the choice is ultimately up to you. Thank you.
What are the documents required for Nepalese student? We heard only about India, and if you could please explain about Nepal.
So the documents are exactly the same for whether it's Nepal or India. There is no difference.
Okay. A student has a date on the visa stamp as March 4th, but the date on study permit approval letter is July 2nd. So could you please clarify if the student is able to start class in September 20 semester itself, be it online or hybrid? Please advise.
So, so the visa in your passport will be the ultimate document for you to determine whether or not you meet the travel exemptions. So because the visa in your passport is dated March 4th, you technically fall under the travel exemptions. You could potentially travel. But you have to meet the second part of the requirements to be able to travel at this time, which is to demonstrate that you need to be, it is essential for your presence to be in Canada. So that means that you have in-person classes or you have a hybrid class where your presence is physically required in that class in Canada for part of the semester. So unless that's very clear, you will not be allowed to travel despite your visa being issued before March 18. And if I can just elaborate a little bit on this, because there's been a lot of questions on, you know, why is there now a need to prove that there is essential travel is required, and why not just, you know, allow all students who've been issued visas before March 18 to travel. So this restriction is actually not new. Even pre-pandemic, any person who wished to come to Canada for a temporary purpose, whether you were a visitor, a worker, or a student, had to prove to CBSA at the port of entry whether or not they actually needed to enter Canada. So for a visitor, for example, who indicates that they want to go visit Niagara Falls, they will be asked to show their hotel reservations, funds in their bank account that they can pay for this travel, a return ticket back to their home country, etc. For a student, for example, you know how we told you that you shouldn't be traveling until at most, 3 weeks before the start date of your classes. So if a student were to travel, say 3 months before the start of their classes, they would be turned away. Why? Because their classes aren't starting yet. Why do you need to travel so early? If the student says something like, well, I want to check out Canada, I want to do a little sightseeing or tourism, then you need to get a visitor visa because your visa is issued for the purpose of studying physically in Canada. So when you have online courses, the purpose of your visa is to study in class in Canada. You are not meeting that requirement, that criteria, which is why you could potentially be offloaded from your flight or turned away at the port of entry in Canada at your own expense and returned to your home country from there. Thank you.
The next question states, the complete files that have been lodged and status is showing as we are reviewing whether you meet eligibility requirements or not for a very long time. What does that mean as the status is continuing for quite some time now?
So it can mean a lot of things. Because I don't have the details of your application, it's very difficult for me to comment on this question. So when the system was developed and what you're looking at, the online portal for your application, this is all pre-pandemic, keep in mind, right? And that this AIP process that we're talking about today didn't exist when this was all built and put together. So this is not yet in our system to let you know that you know, you've received an AIP, for example. So this message that you're seeing in your CIC portal, this could mean all sorts of things, like perhaps you haven't submitted your medicals yet, or perhaps there's an issue with your medicals and that you need to do further testing, or perhaps we're waiting for a document from you before we can conclude your application. So it could really mean a lot of things. Thank you.
If a student has taken up a 1 year of program online starting in May intake, they are already done with 50% of the program by September. If the travel restrictions are not lifted, student is supposed to stop studying the second semester or wait for the travel ban lift?
So as I mentioned in a previous question that was asked, this is your choice. You can decide whether or not self-improvement and learning something new is enough for you, or if you need something in addition to that. So if what you are looking for ultimately is a postgraduate work permit, then we have to follow what the policy states, that 50% must be done in Canada. So you can base you'll have to make the decision for yourself and base it on that information I've just provided. Thank you.
If a student files his visa application but is not able to receive his AIP before the start of fall 2020 program, can he start his online studies without AIP? Also, those hours of online study before getting an AIP would be counted towards PGWP or not?
So technically, no, you should have at least submitted an application before you started your online studies. Whether or not, so let's talk about a little of the details of the policy. We're asking students to submit their application before September 15 in order for all of the stage 2 process to be applied. We are working out a few details of whether or not we can look at the application received data and you know, that time forward will count towards your postgraduate work permit, or if it's when you actually receive the AIP decision. So please wait. We'll probably post on our social media to answer this question for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just moving, just keeping in mind of the time here. There are a lot of repetitive questions, so I'm just trying to see if there's a new question which is coming here. And okay. There's one question which is different, which says one of our students had his visa approved on 26th of January 2020 for May intake, and it will get expired on 30th November 2020. He was not able to leave for Canada due to the lockdown. What should he do to reach Canada?
So you haven't started your class. What I would suggest, number one, is that you obtain a new letter of acceptance or some sort of document from your school indicating that your enrollment has been deferred to a future semester, whether that semester is September 2020 or January 2021 or even later potentially. Once you've secured that document, send it to us in an email or upload it through our web form on our website, and let us know that you still intend to travel, that this is your new evidence of deferral of enrollment, and that you need a new visa. So keep in mind that VACs are currently closed and we cannot issue you a new visa right now. If you are able to, so you'll have to travel before your visa expires in order to get an extension if you were in Canada. But if your presence isn't physically required in Canada for fall 2020, there's no way for you to travel right now. So I would suggest that you wait for VACs to reopen and ask for your visa or document to be reissued to the new date based on this deferral of enrollment. So if you are asking for a new visa, keep in mind that there is a fee for a document replacement fee of $30 that you can pay online as well if you choose to go this route. This is probably what I would suggest would be best to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And the students need to submit their quarantine plan to the Canadian government or the institute in which they have got admission.
So you need to have this plan with you when you are traveling. So as when you get to the airport, someone may want to see it. And then when you get to the port of entry after landing in Canada, someone will definitely want to see it, meaning the port of entry officer or CBSA. So this plan, so where are you going to stay? If it's a hotel, for example, that you're staying in, where is your reservation? If it is not a hotel, say it's a B&B, how are you getting your food? What if you need medicine? Think of all those things that you need to have taken care of for you for the 2-week period that you're under quarantine, and you need to show this plan to the port of entry officer. So, because keep in mind, like, quarantine means you cannot leave the room that you're living in, right? It doesn't mean that, oh, if I wear a mask, I can go outside and do some shopping and, take care of my needs. No, you cannot physically leave your house or your hotel room or whatnot. So make sure that your plan includes all of this information. Otherwise, you may be turned away. Thank you.
Yeah, I think keeping the time, keeping in mind time, I'll take up this last question here, who says, secondly, a lot of colleges are asking students to study the program online. However, students are not happy studying the entire course online, citing reasons of time differences, lower internet bandwidth, etc. Moreover, they feel they paid the fee to be in Canada and not study the entire program online. What about if colleges ask to study the complete program online? So, for example, postgraduate students opt for a 1-year graduate certificate. So what happens to these students?
So that is your choice. We are not forcing you to take these classes. You decide what you want for yourself, whether this is a program I really want to learn, and you will take it whether it's online or in person. Or you decide that, well, part of my plan is to study in Canada and have all these other experiences. So the choice is really up to you whether you take that program or not. We should not factor in that decision. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Elena. And so
I'm available for a few more minutes if you want to, if we want to do some more questions, because I'm seeing here there's like 230 questions right now on the board.
Yeah, I'm scrolling and just okay, so I'll take some more here. Okay, so now this is one interesting. Exactly how many funds to be required in a non-STS stream? Also the mode of funds. Can a student show the money in the form of a fixed deposit?
Yes. So if you're applying non-SDS, you need to show us liquid funds, meaning money in a bank, or that tuition has been paid, or a GIC has been bought. So liquid funds that you have enough money for a full year for tuition, living expenses, and transportation costs. In addition to this, you also need to show us a plan of how you intend to pay for the remaining years of your program if there is more than 1 year, without working in Canada. So what are those documents? So you could provide us, yes, a bank account with a fixed deposit, yes. But if you are showing me a bank account with 50,000 Canadian dollars in it, you need to tell me where did that money come from. And you need to show me how that money came to you. So if your parents, for example, worked hard and saved all this money, you need to show us how did they accumulate this money? Were they working? At what job? Here is their employment letter. Here are their pay stubs. Here are their copies of their checks, etc. So you need to show us the provenance of those funds, in addition to actually showing us the fixed deposit account.
Thank you. So now, student filed a paper application in the month of February, and each and every stage is updated, including medical as well as biometrics. Can the student expect any response, whether acceptance or rejection on his visa application?
So it's very hard for me to comment on specific cases because I don't have your case in front of me. There could be something outstanding, which is what is the holdup. So I'm honestly unsure. Like I said, there are no current processing times during this pandemic, so I can't even say, if processing times have passed, you should contact us. No, there are no processing times. What I will tell you is that please be patient. The AIP letters are coming. I know that most have not yet received them, but they are coming. So if in your case, eligibility is passed for you, you know, even if medicals are also passed and all those other things for stage 2, if stage 1 is passed for you, you should be receiving a letter in the next few weeks. Thank you.
If a student gets visa refusal at second stage, and by then the withdrawal date is over at the institution, student is likely to lose the first semester fee. Will visa be issued before the withdrawal deadline if all documents are submitted except the biometric?
So the question confuses me a little bit, because you said that if stage 2 was refused.
If the student gets visa refusal at second stage, yes, at the second stage.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't get a visa if you've been refused at stage 2. Like, that's the bottom line. You know, in case anybody online is wondering, you know, how could you get a stage 2 refusal? I can tell you that there are 2 main reasons. Number 1 is that someone has provided either fraudulent documents or incorrect information on their application. And basically you will be barred from applying and going to Canada for the next 5 years. And I frankly don't have any sympathy for anyone who provides false information or false documents. The second reason could be, and what's usual, like I can tell you there's so many other things we look at for stage 2, but for the student caseload, the other pieces are very low risk. Like, we're talking, you know, terrorism, espionage, even criminality. Like, these are this population is very low risk for that. I really honestly, you know, don't think you should worry about that piece. But the one you need to worry about is medicals. So students tend to fail their medicals if they do not follow instructions when they potentially have a medical issue and they've been given an opportunity to fix that medical issue. So some of you may be aware that students receive what we call a medical furtherance when they've been, for example, deemed to be have active TB or potentially have active TB. They're told to do some extra testing and go through a medical or drug regimen and then come back after like 12 weeks or 16 weeks to redo the tests. And usually students are given 2 chances, like two time periods to get this all done. So if for the first 16 weeks, like your situation has not improved, they might extend it and have you do another set of tests and another set of drug regimen to see if that can fix your situation. And then only after that, if really, you know, your active TB is not going away, we of course cannot have someone board a flight and come to Canada with active tuberculosis. Really, that's the only time I've ever seen where a student was refused at stage 2. All the other reasons why a student may be refused usually falls under stage 1, like you didn't provide enough documents to prove you have the funds to pay for your school, or you didn't have high enough IELTS scores, or you gave us an LOA with conditions, but you didn't show us how you met those conditions. Like, these are usually the things we refuse study permit applications for, and this is all stage 1. So when you're looking at stage 2, you shouldn't worry too much that that you could potentially be refused unless you provide fake documents, fake information, or you refuse to follow our instructions for medical furtherance.
Thank you. And in sync with the same question, the question also says that would the visa at stage 2 be issued before the tuition fee, withdrawal deadline, so that in case if a student has a rejection, there is time for them to apply for a refund?
So this you have to discuss with the school. IRCC has no jurisdiction over how schools determine their refund policy.
Okay. Yeah, this one. What about a student who has already passed the medical 30 days ago and decision is still pending? Can we submit the web form for this query, or should we wait?
I would say wait. So right now you can't travel anyways. right? And the VACs are closed. So how are you going to get your passport to us to get the visa? So I wouldn't panic. If your online portal tells you that, you know, everything is passed and it's ready to go and we're almost ready to issue a visa, fantastic. Just sit tight. When the VACs are ready to reopen is when you will likely get that passport request letter from us to submit. So right now, for everybody online, like, this is really a time to exercise a lot of patience, and you know, in all aspects of life, not just study permit applications. But yeah, please sit tight. More information is going to be coming your way about how we can get you that visa. But first, a few things need to happen. The travel restrictions need to be lifted so that you can actually travel, and VACs need to reopen so that we can actually get you that visa. Thank you.
Visa application is launched in March 20 with IELTS expiring in June 2020. So now defer letter is submitted for September 20. Do we need fresh IELTS?
So officers can use their discretion on whether or not they want to accept the expired IELTS. So we note that they were valid at the time of submission, and we might just accept them as is. That's what I would do if I was processing your case. But this is really up to the officer's discretion.
So, okay, now this is May 2020 study permit applications were submitted to Bangalore consulate and were received denials from Delhi office with the same reasons, despite having a good profile to get visa. Does the applicant need to submit defer offer letter voluntary without the request from CIC?
I don't quite understand a piece of that question. So you submitted to the Bangalore office, and then, but it was Delhi was asking for IELTS?
No, Delhi.
Is that the question?
The denials were received from the Delhi office with the same, in spite of having, you know, good profile. So the reason for rejection,
right?
Should they, you know, submit a defer letter voluntary?
So what you need to do is reapply because your application has been refused. So submit your new application, and depending on what that refusal ground was in your letter, you need to demonstrate that that refusal ground is no longer an issue.
Just scrolling down. IRCC has tweeted on its official Twitter account that for non-SDS students, they do not require English test.
So for the India caseload and the Nepalese caseload, because I know some Nepalese students are on here as well, yes, you will require English language test results for your application to be approved.
Student has got the offer for ESL from the university with conditional offer for bachelor. Still, students needs to appear for IELTS, or his application can be processed without it.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't quite hear it.
Yeah, student has got the offer from ESL from a university with a conditional offer for bachelors. So does the student need to appear for IELTS, or can the application be processed without an IELTS score?
So generally speaking, we do not accept ESL programs for study permit applications in this region, because there is more than ample opportunities in this region to take ESL courses. What I would recommend is that you do your ESL course here, in whether it's India or Nepal, and then take that IELTS exam. And once you've reached a high enough score, then apply for a study permit to just do your program in Canada.
This one is one of the students we were assisting for visa got a student visa as on March 3rd for 13 days. Probably this is an error, and as the application has been resubmitted, the wait period has been more than 3 months now. So is there a way to speed up for such kind of applications?
Right. So we need to fix your visa. I'm very sorry that we give you a 13-day visa. So like I said, VACs are currently closed, so there's really no way for us to have a two-way passport transmission. But what you can do is send us this information through our web form. And then what we'll do is we'll notate this in your application, cancel the current visa and trigger a new one to be printed, and at the same time send you a passport request letter. And then as soon as the VACs reopen, you can resubmit your passport and we can reissue you a new visa.
I want to ask how a student can extend visa if the student already has a visa for May 20 and don't want to join classes online till now.
So it all depends on how long your visa is valid for. For example, if your visa is valid until the end of 2021 or even mid 2021, don't bother applying for a new visa. You can, if it seems that fall 2020 for most schools will be online. So you're probably looking at January 2021. You can go to Canada and ask for an extension. If you want a new visa, what you can do, because you haven't traveled yet, is write to us with your updated letter of offer and pay the document replacement fee. And what we can do is cancel the current visa, reissue it to the new date, and then once VACs reopen, you can submit your passport for visa reissuance.
Is police verification mandatory for stage 2 approval?
Sorry, what is mandatory?
Police verification.
So you do not need to submit any police certificates unless we request it from you. So it's not mandatory that you submit it with your application. Just wait for an officer to send you a request letter. And if we never do, it means we don't need it.
Students submitting complete profiles and their IELTS is expiring while the file is still in process with IRCC. What about those cases?
So I really wouldn't worry if your IELTS is near expiry. We will likely still accept it.
For a 4 years bachelor's degree, does the student and the parents have to furnish financial documents for all the 4 years of study?
So it's not necessarily that you need to show us you already have the money for your full 4 years, but that at the very least you have a plan of how you intend to pay for the remaining 3 years, right? Because you need to show us you have already the money for the first year. So you only need to show us your plan for the next 3 years. If you already have the money, bonus. This is a very easy assessment for us. But if you do not already have the money, because your parents still need to earn it as you're going through school, you need to show us where this money is going to come from. And it needs to basically equal tuition, living expenses, and transportation for those remaining years.
There is a rumor that you will consider the performance of the student in online classes after an AIP for the final visa.
So that will not factor in the stage 2, but it could potentially factor in stage 1. So how it will factor is this. Someone who has already invested in a Canadian education, be it online, is showing us that they are a genuine student, that they want to study, that they've already started studying, and they want to either go and complete their program or start a new one in Canada. So this is certainly in your favor if you've already done some online courses at a Canadian DLI.
And I'm just going to see. Elena, do you have time? Can I take more questions, or should we?
Maybe 2 more and then let's go.
Okay. What is the success rate for a study permit when a student wants to study a diploma course from a Canadian college?
So you're asking about our approval rates. So you've seen the list of all of the documents we require for an AIP. Now, in addition to those things, you should also think about writing a motivation letter to tell us why you've chosen that program and why you want to study in Canada, because this will help us to decide whether or not you're actually sincere about wanting to study in Canada as opposed to doing other things like working. So if you provide all of those documents, including this, and don't forget that financial plan if there is more than 1 year of schooling, you should certainly increase your chances of getting a visa.
Okay, I think this probably will be the last one. Student visa expired before 2 months and the student is in India, and due to lockdown, he was not able to reach Canada and is studying online classes. Which visa we need to put for him?
So he'll need a new study permit, right? So I assume you don't have a study permit extension, like you didn't apply for one when you were in Canada. So if that's not the case, then you need a brand new study permit. If, for example, you do have a study permit extension, which you applied for while you were in Canada, but you just do not have a visa that is of the same validity date, then you need to apply for a returning student visa. This is very similar to like a visitor visa. So the coding on the visa will be V1. And it's essentially like a visitor visa. It'll be the same validity date as your study permit extension, if that is what you have. Otherwise, please apply for a new study permit.
I think this probably will last. Can I get a visa with the TOEFL home edition test?
No, because we don't accept any of the online English language test scores right now. That being said, I mean, as Anandita mentioned, things are fluctuating and changing all the time. As of right now, I can only ever speak to the policies valid right now, which is we do not accept those tests.
I think the questions have kept on coming. I think I will stop here. I'm trying to screen whatever is coming up new here. And there was one question says, is age factor a criteria for applying?
So as I mentioned, you should consider submitting a letter of motivation to tell us why you want to come study in Canada and why your program of study. And where you've had a break in academics, where you're not, moving from one school to another, where you maybe have been working for a while or not been in school for a while, you need to explain to us what is motivating you to start up academics all over again. And that will factor greatly in the decision of your application. So just make sure that you explain yourself well.
Okay. Thank you, Elena and Nandita. Chirag, do you want to add on?
No, I guess.
Well, thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
I really appreciated it. Thank you, M Squared Media. We appreciate being able to share this information with your community. I realize we're at 299 questions now that I see that have been asked, and I know we've answered some of them, but clearly not most of them. I wonder if perhaps you might be able to flip us all of these questions, because it will help us understand where there are gaps in information sharing with the clients, and we will try to address these on our social media so that everyone will be able to receive this information.
We will arrange to send you these questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We had an overwhelming response for today's webinar. Let us continue supporting one another. Lastly, I would like to thank Elena and Anandita for such an informative session. Thank you so much, Elena and Anandita. All the information, it was very helpful. Thank you. Sunita, would you like to conclude?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anandita and Elena, and thank you at your agents for participating. And as of now, please take good care of yourself and let us stare at this challenge in the face Stay safe, be brave, and we are with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us over. Have a good evening.